This film is entitled Kundalini, a Case Study, a personal experience. This is intended to be an almost intimate testimonial about what Kundalini is, with a view toward translating that experience into some suggestions in the sequel, which would be about the hygiene, obviously. So, I've been having Kundalini experiences for maybe it's 30 years. And there's a lot of myth about it. But I think it's very good to be very practical. Remember in the section where we talked about the physics, that when you feel that intense, focused, dense charge, feels like a lightning up your tailbone at some point, or it can feel it in your heart, or my teacher Bentoff felt it greatly in his solar plexus, and he could steer some things with his Kundalini. And then the massive rush of burning at the crown. And these things are, they're dramatic, they're powerful. Whether it's a necessary phase of evolution, I would say I'm not so sure. What I would say is it does accelerate metabolism, mentation rate, the rate of your thinking. It stresses the mineral to water bond in the blood, has nutritional issues, hygiene issues, which we're going to discuss later. But it does mean that I can talk fast. And it means, even when I was a kid, I think they said I had something like a fantastically analytical mind. So, I could process things rather quickly. And, double Scorpio, and at that time a virgin. So I had a lot of conserved sexual energy also, I suppose. And so under those circumstances, it is possible that metabolism can begin to compress and accelerate. And if you can handle that acceleration, it is a mine of information. That's true. Wherever, charge is intensely focused, there is information by definition. For example, I believe lightning is well informed, as anyone who has had lightning near-death experiences, like Tesla, as we discussed, and Daniel Brinkley. So, getting to how, the suggestions of how it began for me, and then suggestions in general for how to help grow the Kundalini. I was fairly slender. I think I was about 21 or 22 years old. I had had a relatively poor diet at University of Detroit, psychophysiology, and then I decided I was going to go to the Gurdjieff school. And my parents, of course, assumed I had just gone insane, and later came to rescue me from the cult. But my parents were loving and patient, and I was very lucky, actually. But yes, and at the Gurdjieff school, we were doing the sacred gymnastic. And I must say that was very important because, any kind of intense Tai Chi or yoga, or the Castaneda tensegrity, of course, these things enable the focusing of your attention in your body, and even better, that you can move your attention consciously from node to node, and notice that where you put your attention, specifically, you get blood flow and nervous innervation, so you feel a tingle. We've often taught that, as Gurdjieff's exercise was, that when you could put your attention into your baby finger and notice that when your attention got there, your baby finger started to tingle and grow, and you have felt a warm aura. So I'm feeling a tingle, and my baby finger's getting a little warm here. So we were advised in the Gurdjieff school that was a necessary first step, to become aware that the placement of your attention and its centripetal electrical quality was the beginning of your ability to grow that flame, first in your body and then out of your body. So, and that's why in physics, where they're talking today, as a lot of physicists accept the fact that consciousness is probably not your brain. Consciousness is probably the electric field around your brain. And that's a very helpful insight, because that gets people to thinking, oh, how do I build and maintain that electric field so that I can become a lucid dreamer and immortal and take memory through death? And that ability, which I call longitudinal coherent EMF propagation, the Ka from the Ba from the Ka is the Egypt, or Gurdjieff's term, building the Kesjan body, Kesjahn, which I believe is this coherent envelope that results from charge implosion, phase conjugating, imploding, pine cones kissing noses, the transverse component of the EMF becomes a longitudinal compressional wave. And that wave can propagate faster than light, and it achieves action at a distance in this way that when two longitudinal waves cross again at a distance, the pine cones again kiss noses in a square, in an array, and there, again, that longitudinal component exchanges inertia with the transverse component, which is how we communicate, how all our radios work, etc., the transverse. So the longitudinal waves is the carrier wave, but the transverse wave is the information wave. These are the components of an electromagnetic wave. And physics doesn't know how to deal with longitudinal electromagnetics almost at all. A few RF scientists know how to build a longitudinal antenna, but it's sad because even as Bearden insists, longitudinal EMF is the mechanism of gravity waves, and we now believe the way, for example, Therify plasma tubes create that imploding conjugate field, and we've had feedback, beautiful feedback from Maya, that we're able to trigger lucid dreaming. That's an important step in my view, because that means we know how the aura, by using that implosive compression, broad spectral, to project a field which is coherent longitudinally, translate directly into the psychological experience of coherent lucid dreaming. There's a beautiful feedback story from Maya from Greece and Paris in the blog at therify.net about that. So, Kundalini is taking that compression moment, enabling you to project your aura into an array, and that array are those nodes where the cross points, we could call it the sacred earth grid, etc., or where ley lines cross. Remember, the only place you can make a labyrinth or a cathedral or a cozy rev mirror work are the same magnetic earth cross nodes where Kathy measured a reduced nuclear critical mass. We understand the physics now. Same reason implosive capacitance reduces nuclear critical mass, because it's centripetal. Those are the nodes which can enable this kind of process. So you wouldn't really want to attempt intense Kundalini experiences in a metal building in bad air in an ugly city, because during Bliss and the implosive charge radiance of Kundalini, you're sucking in your environment. That's what's feeding the flame. And if your environment is geopathic, you're sucking poison into your body. So we'll do more about that in the hygiene. But back to my story. So there I am in George Washington's nephew's pig farm, Charlestown, West Virginia, claymont.org, learning my sacred gymnastics and doing our meditations. And I had just changed diet from the University of Detroit, you can imagine, not so good, to there in the Gurdjieff School, we had our own garden, fresh beans, fresh produce every day, and a lot less meat and mostly live food. And so I was getting chi in my diet, and things were unpacking for me. I was lucky because at that age I had a lot of chi, I think. And they even commented that even though I seemed to be a nerd, for some reason I seemed to be able to do the sacred gymnastics. I was actually coordinated. And I think that had to do with the fact that my mother, the music teacher, I was playing Mozart at age 4, and I was a church organist in the 6th grade. So, the rhythm, I had the rhythm maybe. First, I want to tell you about one critical aspect that you begin to find out quickly, is that, remember we were talking about the physics mechanism of the spine liquid pump, the sacrocranial juices. So here I'm doing what's called the pelvic tilt. So I'm moving my pelvis all the way forward. And when I move my pelvis forward over my tailbone, if you visualize, my tailbone is going like this. It's unpacking like this. And that has a very dramatic effect because, when this is happening, you really think about, well, what's the plumbing? I didn't know my tailbone was a straw to suck. And, does that really suck? Well, I think it sucks, actually. I even studied the physics of that, and apparently there are vestigial horsehairs from when we had monkey tails around the tailbone, which we now know function as microwave guides, almost in the sense of the microtubules, which some say is the physics of consciousness. So these vestigial horsehairs around the tailbone, along with the tailbone itself, potentially can have a sucking effect. This is new information to most physicists and biologists, but I am very convinced that the tailbone can suck. And how does it suck? Because the spine liquid pump is a snake charmer. And the phonon harmonics, the low frequencies, the spine liquid pump, remember we discussed that in the physics section, you're doing this breathing. And so that's the snake charmer at work, and it can create a bit of suction at the tailbone. Now, what is at the tailbone? We have a residual component of the climax of cellular metabolism. So we call the cell's climax function is to make a high quality ultraviolet blue fire light coherent. And biophysics is clear that ultraviolet light coherence is the motor of cell metabolism. That is clear. That's my teacher Earl Etienne, University of Massachusetts, medical. And so the gathering of that blue fire, we could call it a sex juice, and it is a sex juice. It is the creative juices of the cell. And it needs some place to go, because if it gets stuck in the cell, then it bounces back to center and triggers replication. So that's almost the definition of cancer. The cell membrane is too hard. Well, then the cell membrane is soft and not spherical. If it gets spherical, it's called cancer. So the cell membrane is not spherical, more egg-like, more projective, in the sense of structural stability and morphogenesis, the biophysics of cell metabolism, enables the projection of the cellular creative juice, blue fire, to be gathered. And if young people have not overindulged in premature promiscuity, there is some pressure there. And the ability, which in my case, for example, I had not indulged. In fact, I was probably rather frustrated and a virgin there at 22 years old or something in the graduate school. So I probably had a little bit of extra double Scorpio sex juice. And that is only one component. Of course, what feeds that ultimately is quality nutrition, life, chi, life force in the food. At any rate, so then if you've done the movement and you have the discipline of attention and your glands have evolved to a certain point, which is that really it's true that Kundalini would not be available to everyone because it is a climax of a form of glandular evolution. It's simple physics. And so, I think in some ways older souls, quote unquote, whatever that means, may have more mature emotionally, may have more glandular ability to support the building of this flame from within. And remember, flame is how mind is built. So you're building a plasma flame. So here comes, now your tailbone is tilted, you have the pelvic tilt, and then you begin to feel, I can actually feel it now a little bit, but you feel, as I place my attention there, you feel a bit of a pulse, a warm pool of energy at your tailbone. And then as I'll move around a little bit and I will center myself, relax, and now I can feel it. It's coming up here. Now I can feel it right here. And see, at any of these places where you've stored lots of pain and unprocessed emotion, it will reach a slip knot and block and create heat. And when I first started doing this, I cried straight for like months at a time, weeping. And I couldn't even have told you whether or not it was tears of joy or sadness. I didn't know, but it was tears. I'll tell you that for sure. And I know now that every single stored emotion that was not processed or shareable or made into a perfectly shareable wave, the physics of coherence named pure attention, will create, you have to process. So the first thing that happens as you feel that rush coming up is that any emotion that's there has to be sorted. Bentoff had this experience in his belly, and he would project his plasma from there, and he describes the experience of feeling him entrain the aura of the whole planet gradually, very slowly, and he could feel and eventually see through the eyes of the planet. It's a beautiful story. You must read Stalking the Wild Pendulum, Ben Bentoff, and the Cosmic Comic Book. This is another testimonial to a case study in Kundalini, which is what this film is about. So, in my case, I think I had a lot of will and intent in my throat. It took a long time. And then, eventually, it reaches the crown. And today, for example, I can make golden ratio, flameinmind.com brainwaves rather easily because I can, at will, trigger that urge to bliss, which is a bliss which I can feel now. I feel... I'm feeling it now. I'm feeling gradually the inside of my head is becoming very, very light. I mean, I don't mean just light with gravity, but I feel right now a very, very bright. It's, the Earth likes it that we're talking about this because the Earth Gaia wants you to know. So she's sending lots of light here saying, good, tell the kids. So all this light is coming in. It's like very blissful. Because hopefully we have pure intent in making this film, so that makes it a shareable wave, that makes implosion possible. So I can feel a great ball of light. Basically, I have the blessing of being able to create that in part at will if I'm doing something which is shareable. Anyway, now, if I were to stay in that position and allow it, then I can feel it go through the top of my head. So Valerie always talks about, you put your hand over my head and she can feel it tingle. You can feel the negative ions because my pineal has been roasted so many times. And I do mean roasted. I mean, it feels like it's cooking in a red hot flame. There's been a joke at times about Kundalini can feel like a red hot coal inside your head that you can't knock out. It's a fire. And you see, that's one danger of that fire, is because it can be dehydrating. It stresses the mineral to water bonds. It requires nutrition. Take your trace minerals and maybe, in my case, your vitamins. And because this is an array, the molecules are an array, which are then supporting charge density. And as the charge density gets great, the need for grounding, hydration is critical. Similar to experiencing plasma fire density at therify.net. So we always say, read the book Earthing. And in my case, and in other cases, if you don't learn how to kind of walk barefoot and do the things necessary to ground, and grounding is a very simple process. I'm going to take my socks off just for a second here. And taking my socks off, I'm just going to touch this stone here. And as I touch that stone, what I'm feeling right now at this moment is my attention moving downward, and I'm now getting into phase relationship with the earth. And that means that all my Planck golden ratio implosions in my body are being locked into phase with a shareable wave. Remember, all grounding is access to fractality, whether it's electricians or psychologists. and that business of barefoot on the earth, why the indigenous people could lucid dream, is the business of re-locking me into phase with. And so now this flame no longer feels out of control at this moment. Now, if I were to lie and the ley line in this room is right over here, there on that couch. But when I lie on that couch, which I know is a magnetic line, goes right up to Canigoo, it's really wonderful. And so when I lie on that line and I close my eyes and I can feel the magnetism go out of the top of my head, and I can see. I mean, it's literally a periscope. It's wonderful. I mean, I can. And now, my clairvoyance is untrained and undisciplined. My clairaudience is a bit more trained, but not particularly disciplined either. But we now know the physics of clairvoyance and clairaudience. It's the ability to entrain and phase lock with, and therefore perceive, quote unquote, the longitudinal array. That's what clairvoyance and clairaudience is. And in my case, since I was hypersound oriented from even when I'm a kid, my music teacher is very intrigued with my perfect pitch. She played, oh, here's 2 notes, 3 notes, 4 notes at once. I'm playing on the piano, and I could name every one of them without looking. So perfect is a strong word for perfect pitch, but it's still that. They say it's a calibration of the ear, of the hairs inside the spiral of the ear. But whatever it is, perfect pitch is an indication of, and it's even been measured, increased innervation here, that it increases the phase discipline of your relationship with the world. And so being intensely audio oriented, obviously the first organ of perception that would be ignited in my case was probably clairaudience. It's funny, I actually noticed the rate at which the hairs inside my ear were growing accelerated. So it's an attention geometry that produces an array experience where you can then become aware of the whole array. So my echolocation, for example, is quite good. And my clairaudience means, on my good days, I can talk to some ancestors. And we've had that experience with Valerie quite a few times. It's a bit of a long story. But, so these are called the siddhis, which are called the kind of the quote-unquote miracles that are associated with Kundalini. And as always, even the TM people got that right, that you don't want to let the siddhis distract you. You need to focus on your goal, which is obviously a consciousness that continues to rise, which is to say your aura continues to grow. And eventually you'll be able to become aware of your ability to project that plasma ball of fire into whatever it is that you like. Now, this, at that time, just to relay my experience a little bit, we began to do Ophanim Enochian rituals with Vincent Bridges, who is famous. And you can read about all those stories at goldenmean.info/Ophanim. And one of those experiences, we began to notice, effect on the weather, effect on rainmaking. In fact, I became a little bit, I wouldn't say famous as a rainmaker, but a lot of my friends became aware that I could make rain. Now, actually, I don't think I can make rain just anywhere, anytime, but if the circumstances are right, for example, one time in Australia, Valerie was there, it was Mullumbimby, and there had been a 2 months drought, and it was getting to be a pain in the ass. I didn't want that drought ananymore. I said, Valerie, we're doing something. I went out on the porch, and we did this intense Kundalini. I invoked the flame. And it's true. Valerie was there. They had a flood for the next 3 days, and when I told our friends in Brazil about doing this, now in that case we were using quartz crystal stone labyrinth spiral, and you can read all about this at goldenmean.info/rain. And the physics is simple. The more centripetal you become, that is the only real physics of precipitation. Well-known phenomena. Trevor Constable documenting Wilhelm Reich's book, Rainmaking on the High Seas, figures out that the cone capacitor, which they called an orgone accumulator, but it's actually a cone capacitor, is a 60-degree cone, which we now know is the perfect implosion of that cone right there, between dodeca, icosahedodecahedron, that cone is a 60-degree cone. Well, that turns out to be the cone which electrically has been measured as the best way to make rain, if you believe Trevor Constable. Now, so basically, the reason is because that is the correct angle for purely implosive phase conjugate capacitance. So if you were to track a child, most children who go outside and are happy, best if they're dancing barefoot in the mud is excellent, but they can focus on a cloud, ask permission, and make a hole in that cloud. Almost all children can do this if they're happy and healthy. Now, the physics is instructive. The reason a hole appears in that cloud is because the water vapor in that area has experienced centripetal implosive capacitance that teaches the vapor to touch, enabling what's called Christos, the crystallization process, permission to touch, which means learn how to share, which means get centripetal or get dead. And so the water droplets appear. Of course, when the vapor learns to touch, then the droplet gets heavier and something precipitates. We're precipitating some ideas here, precipitously. So you can understand the physics. So obviously, in one of my teachers, Lee Sanella's book, Kundalini, Psychosis or Transcendence, who had a Kundalini clinic in San Francisco for many years, and we traveled with him. He referred to an ancient Icelandic tradition within which Kundalini experiencers were called, quote, the great masts of God. All that means is if somebody's aura is getting big enough, you can probably see it from a distance. Well, that's not surprising. But also, that fountain of flame will have some effect on its environment. And that is appropriate because we need to learn about why bliss would have critical mass. You know that governments get very worried when bliss gets critical mass because collective bliss experiences is the definition of body politics, body polis, a bliss cocoon, which makes the collective will navigable. The only real definition of politics is a collective bliss cocoon. We've talked about this before, but any beehive can tell you we ain't swarming until somebody's navigating. And who navigates? The queen, royal blood. And how do they navigate? A bliss cocoon of coherent plasma that's navigable. So collective bliss experience obviously is threatening to governments because once a group has a collective bliss experience, they have the biological definition of body politic to become self-directing. Now, it's true, however, that a government that recognizes the purpose of biology, which is to make bliss, because without bliss, charged radiance, you do not get an immune system and you do not make it through death. So you could pretty well define the purpose of people if you understood the physics, really. So, the physics of what it is to be a politician should be to enable your children to have bliss, which, in my view, is the definition of culture. We talk about that. So, have we finished the Kundalini personal experience story? Well, ultimately, it's not about just acquiring psychokinesis. It's fun. It can be useful. And like any powerful tool, it can be used or misused. But it's more about evolving the horizon of your perception, which ultimately is limited by the horizon of your compassion. So as you begin to live in the center of a lightning bolt, you learn to always be feeling the feelings of both sides of the war. That's a trick here. So can you feel their pain and their pain both on both sides of the war at once? That's an indication that your aura is ready to grow. Because then you embed and you feel that body. And so that teaches you more of the hygiene, which tells you when and where you can do your Kundalini because you don't want to implode. Just like you can't fall in love with a metal building because it's not embeddable. But you could fall in love with a forest or a beautiful woman because you're looking for pure intention, which is pure implosion. So we should go more now later into the conditions, the hygiene, the diet, the environment. For example, this kind of intense bliss experience is contagious both for better and for worse. The other ladies in the office may more often get headaches when they're around you, actually, if you're imploding and they're not, for example. But it has critical mass. It means that in a meditation circle, you could be an anchor for something, high amperage, as it were, and that could be a service if you learn to be a shareable wave, which is to feel the feelings of all.